Hello and welcome to the latest interview in our series of Sonicstate compilation album chats with the various contributors. And, well, doesn't need a huge deal of introduction, but please welcome Mr. Richard Hilton. Hi, Rich.
Hi, Gaz. Good to be here, always. Always great to talk to you.
Fabulous. And thanks so much for taking part in this.
Funny, as I listen to that, it's funny as I listen to that because I'm still not sure if it's done.
When is anything ever done? And actually, that will be a question that I'll come to in a moment. But just firstly then, this tune, I mean, it sounds like it's a full synth production. So for people who may be familiar with your work with Chic, that's more, I guess, using more traditional approaches to keyboards, pianos, Rhodes, and the like. So this is quite nice hearing something that's an entire synthetic creation. Would you say that is fair?
Yeah, I guess if I'm to be associated with the live Chic presentation, I can understand why that might be maybe surprising or not what you expect. But it's very consistent with my background, and both parts of the piece reflect different aspects of my influences. So it's kind of fun for me in a way. And I thought it texturally suitable for a Sonicstate project.
Yeah, definitely. So so this is quite an evolving piece, you know, with a kind of moody intro and then quite an impactful rhythm that comes in then. What were the key textures taken from? Was this an in the box production, or were you using any outboard?
Everything was done at every stage in some box or another. Not necessarily the same box, because it was created over a tremendously long period of time. The piece that's the second half of the thing that's got all the groove that follows the synthesizer intro was created, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, as I was learning Ableton Live. And I was really intrigued by the possibilities of the software and wanted to use it, leverage what it does well to hopefully make a piece that wouldn't have otherwise come about on another kind of platform. And it's one of the things I like about Ableton is that when you work there, it sort of facilitates a certain kind of working. And this was just fun for me. I love using traditional elements mixed together with synthetic elements in the texture to make it a hybrid sort of texture out of those kinds of things. And the people who I listen to the most, I guess, kind of do that too. And so that was sort of how it started with that percussive pattern with I think it's on a milk tin, like a large milk thing, or whatever it is, that metallic drumming thing. And then I found the pie tin stuff, and I used some pie tin stuff because I've always liked that as a high frequency exciter. And especially
using samples.
Yeah, some of that, and it's actually, well, I didn't sample it, but it's featured in the bridge, in the bridge section where things kind of break down, and the pie tin kind of plays a solo. So it started like there, basically, with the milk, the ding ding ding, the metallic hand drumming, and the pie tin. And that was based in another piece I had done in a different software that used something else that was sort of like that. So it had become a thing for me at that point. I learned software this way. Like, I'll take it aside and create my own piece in it to explore what it does and give myself time to learn it and be not highly professional at it because you've just started working in it. So this was one of those things where I had spent some time developing some skills in Ableton Live, and now I wanted to see what I could come up with. And I came up with 2 or 3 different things, and this was one of them.
So you said so the groove then that goes back then sort of around 15 years, and then you then built the like intro separately and then brought it all together? Or
so when I was called upon for this task, I had to think about what I had to contribute, and I knew I had these pieces laying that I had done, and that I wasn't sure if they were complete or not. I'm still not. So I apparently, and I have absolutely has this. I have no memory of this whatsoever. But apparently 5 years ago, I opened it up, imported it into Pro Tools because it had been made originally in Ableton, and it is now a 2-track WAV file, basically. And I can't reopen it in Ableton or any version of Ableton I run now because it calls on software that is no longer supported. And so the only way I'm ever going to get this thing open again is to go to somebody else's studio and either bring all these plugins that I still may have or hope that they've got, it's like, I don't know if I could ever actually recreate exactly what's there. So I just mastered what was there and wrote an intro to it about 5 years ago that was this sort of synthetic thing that was drawing on some other influences of mine from my youth, because I came up listening to this stuff. I mean, the Switched on Bach recording was a tremendous sort of eye-opener in my life, and I followed synthesizers from that moment on, and I believe that moment was 1970. And certainly Keith Emerson made a huge impression on me with his synthesizers early on, and then it was just down, the rabbit hole from there. So the opportunity to use them in this sort of way is fun for me, to make a harmonic sort of pyramid like I did and call it an intro. It's sort of a very slow motion version of what some of the movie studios do to introduce their movies. So this one takes place over the space of a minute instead of over the space of 10 seconds. Yeah. That's kind of how it came about. And then I mixed the whole thing and tried to make it sound like one cohesive piece of music. I had to edit the whole second half of it was much longer because I wasn't sure what I was using it for at the time.
So you touched on the idea of here, wondering when something is finished. And I wanted to reflect on that a moment, because you've had this illustrious career working with so many fantastic artists over the years, and obviously working under fairly high pressure and deadlines. How do you reflect on having almost limitless time of a home project compared to the much more tighter deadlined sort of studio work that you've done so much of?
Cool, because I work fast. I mean, I don't always work fast when I'm working with or for other people who don't work fast. But if you just leave it to me, I work fast. And I like working fast. I like the spirit, the energy I like the momentum I get when I'm on a roll with something. And I try to get things in creative bursts. I don't love belaboring things. Now, sometimes belaboring cannot be avoided, but for the most part in the music creation process, I try not to belabor too much. And I kind of trust the vibe, and it's either going to work at the end or it's not. And
are you relying on your instincts then to sort of go, yep, that's it, I can run that off?
Yeah, I think most people start from something that's cool. They come up with something they find. It could be a sound they found on an instrument. It could be a drum beat they heard in their head. It could be a melody they woke up singing. It could be the way they felt about their breakfast that morning. But whatever it is, they come to it with you got to start somewhere, and you got to find something to start with, especially if you're working alone. If you're working in a room full of musicians and you have to rehearse, then there's charts and there's, everybody learning an arrangement. And there's a whole different thing here. But here, when you're working by yourself, you just have to start from creating one cool section of music. So for me, that typically represents something that I think is the chorus. Even in an esoteric sort of electronic sense like this piece, there's usually something that starts out to be, basically you build the big part of it and then you work backwards and build the other sections that support getting to it.
Right. So like a non-linear approach then, getting the main meat and then
in song form. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So you're quite known for being a a performing musician who plays with other musicians, obviously Chic being a great example, but when you are working on your own and you don't have the other musicians to bounce off, how do you kind of make those decisions that maybe typically would be something that's a reaction to what someone else is doing?
The best way I can describe it is, and I always kind of try to look at it this way, is I let the music tell me what to do. If I get out of the way, focus, concentrate, get out of the way, and let it wash over me, the music will generally tell me what to do, either what's there that's too much or what needs to occur to bring it to some other level or place that will support what we've got here.
So in terms of like when you hear maybe new sounds or new production styles, what would stand out to you to make you go, that is breaking new ground, that's cutting edge? Do you tune into the texture? Is that something that you're quite sensitive to?
Yes, always have been, and very much so. Mm-hmm. And it goes all the way back to the classical training that I had as a kid and through college, where, Impressionism and early 20th century music is very, very textural. And then I also got very early into Steve Reich and Philip Glass and things like that. And you could argue also Magma. I don't know if anybody thinks of them the same way, but who also create evolving textures within pieces that add single elements one at a time as the pieces evolve, even though it's a much different overall texture than you'll get with the Steve Reich piece. But and then Tangerine Dream and Brian Eno's early work and all kinds of things informed how I look at that sort of thing. Tomita in the early days, Patrick Gleason did a remarkable work. I was all in it. And I went to school in Ithaca, New York, where basically Bob Moog lived when he invented all this stuff. He lived right up the road in Trumansburg. Essentially, I used to drive by the house that had the mailbox with Moog on it on my way to gigs in Trumansburg. Wow. And saw him speak at Cornell in 1975 for the first time. And so I was all engaged in it. My first encounter with a synthesizer was, I think, 1972, which was an EML 101 that a guitar player I was working with got, because it had 4 oscillators, so it was better than a Mini Moog and patch buttons.
So being tuned in then to being tuned into sort of synths from virtually the beginning, you've witnessed all of these like innovations and changes and fashions. What have been some real standouts for you over the years for and specifically because we're talking about texture, when you've heard like kind of fresh textures and you've been really drawn to it, are there particular moments that you could single out for that?
First hearing Tangerine Dream, it was either Phaedra or the one after it with the turquoise cover that I forget the name of right now. But those were the two that had just sort of come out back to back, and those had a tremendous impact on what I realized could be done in a performance context with these instruments, beyond dweedly melodies, and using them to create soundscapes and things of that nature, which at the time were startling and revolutionary sounding. And when Bauman came up with that cool sequence rhythmic stuff amongst all of that, it was just wow. And I went and saw them. So they had a big influence on me in a way. I used to love to play their stuff, listen to it. I can not play it.
Tangerine Dream was a thing that came to my mind actually on my first listen to your song. So that's really interesting to hear. But I was thinking more about the actual synths and technology, and all of the changes that have happened since like the early 70s. For instance, the introduction of digital synths in the early 80s, was that something that excited you?
There's a lot I liked about it, and there's some things I didn't. And it's funny because what has become the sort of signature 80s synthesizer usage patterns weren't of interest to me at the time, hardly at all, which might come as a surprise to my friends in Duran Duran. But nevertheless, I was really off into esoteric, progressive musical forms and performance styles. The fact that you could store presets was a wonderful thing, but I had already been scaling mountains with this gear that I was gotten in the early 80s and trying to do song productions in these very, very limited sequencer environments. And I know that sounds horribly elitist, and it is interesting to me now, but at the time, it didn't have that much resonance.
You touched on something there that I always find quite fascinating. And actually rewinding back to the 70s and using synths without presets, were you having to patch live then?
Well, my usage of synthesizers live prior to, early days was in one of two contexts. One of them is an improvisational, me and a couple of friends get a couple of tape delays behind a few electronic instruments that, thank goodness, he owned, and do a live sort of improvised performance in the spirit of the Tangerine Dream that we so highly admired. Or it was trying to be Jan Hammer or something like that. In other words, be able to effectively convey melodies from the keyboard of the synthesizer that didn't necessarily have to sound like a guitar or like guitar playing, but just had some conveyance of articulation and connectedness as melodic expressive tool. And so I'm still doing it with this right now.
Yeah,
with exactly the same pursuit I'm doing with this. So that's kind of what I was mostly interested in at the time.
So let's talk about the C-board then, just briefly then, because I was straight away thinking that when you were mentioning that about Jan Hammer and also expressivity. You've been a big champion over the years on Sonic Talk about expressivity. What gives something expressivity in your opinion? What's important in the sound?
I don't even know how to describe that, but if I could just play the melody that's in my head with the phrasing that I think it needs to convey, and it's situational, so there's not like one I can say, well, you just do this. You connect some notes and you don't connect the others. But I grew up playing brass instruments. I grew up as a trombonist. I was a trombone minor in college. And when I play melody on a C-board, I feel like the trombonist I used to be, more than the pianist I am when I'm sitting downstairs at a Steinway.
That's interesting.
So how, I don't think that answers your question about how do you create melody, but it gives you a sense of where it comes from for me.
Yeah. So I guess having variable attack, like on a trombone, you've got a lot of control over attack, and obviously piano, or you've just got that sort of velocity attack, but being able to shape the front of the attack is something that I would probably single out as being something that's important in expressivity. When you play the C-board, do you find that there are parallels to maybe playing the trombone in that you can express in ways that it's difficult to do on a traditional keyboard?
I feel more connected to the tone production through my technique than I do on a traditional keyboard, regardless of what traditional keyboard it is, whether or not it has polyphonic aftertouch, although it's better if it does. There is a thing I think about, and that this question begs a little bit, and I'm going to talk about it, and that is your connectedness to the sound. And what is your connectedness to the sound? So as a pianist, you're essentially, I say this with tremendous reverence and great respect, a machine operator. You're essentially a machine operator. You have to operate a machine to get the music out. There's a whole series of escapements and hammers and dampers and things, wooden resonances and strings, and a tremendous amount of pressure per PSI is going on in front of you in order to get that to happen. And it's a magnificent thing, and it's still one of my favorite things in life, but it is a machine. And then there's another level of connectedness, and that's guitar, where you're touching the vibration. and your ability to touch that vibration. And this includes, violins, mandolins, and pretty much anything that you touch that's vibrating as you're touching it. And that's another degree of distance from the tone, and you're a little closer than you are with a piano, where you're just basically sort of operating a machine. And then to get even closer than that, you are the vibration. So you're a singer or a trumpet player. Or as a sax player, you're very close to being the vibration because you're in physical contact, kind of like a guitarist in a different way. But so it's, to me, I think about how far am I from the vibration? As a synthesist, as somebody who did this piece that's on this project, you couldn't be farther from anything that's vibrating than you are as you undertake a process like that. But when you and I sit in a room with guitars in our hands, we're both touching the music. It's a different level of so I feel almost like that when I play this. It's a convincing enough simulation when it's well programmed to make it a very satisfying melodic experience.
If we can talk about groove a little bit, because obviously Chic being masters of the groove and finding the pocket and being able to play in the pocket is a huge part of music performance. How do you typically translate grooviness to the recording medium?
A lot of things and a lot of tempos or tempi can be funky. And it's, how do you fill the space and how do you fill the silence? How do you allow the silence within the spaces? What represents funkiness to you? You hand most people a guitar and say, play funky, and they start sawing away like crazy on the top 3 strings. And you watch the funkiest guitar players I know, and none of them do that. In particular, the one I play with, who is one of the middle voice harmony geniuses of my lifetime. It does things between the D, G, and B strings that are just unbelievable to me in real time. The connection between his musical brain and his hands is like instantaneous, and it's remarkable. And he knows more chords than any 5 guys I know. And the ones he doesn't know, he makes up on the fly, and they're always good. And so, so it's a question of what makes it funky, and where do you leave the spaces, and how much should any given one thing fill, especially depending on the size of the ensemble. I mean, if it's 3 guys and one guy's sawing away on a guitar, that's one way to fill it. But if you got 5, 6-piece rhythm section, you've got to think like more orchestrally, and you have to think about where your part sits in the overall picture and what needs to be supported right now. And being in Chic, I'm very fortunate to play on a stage full of basically music producers. Everybody has a very, very clear vision of where they sit in the overall picture. And it's unbelievably satisfying to have those wonderful people to play music with who appreciate those things. Because it's pretty much never a shouting match. It's always everybody in there and doing that thing. It's a team. It's totally teamwork. Playing in any kind of large ensemble, anything more than 2, and even 2, is teamwork. And it's how do you interact musically with the situation with those people.
I mentioned that about the groove and the pocket, though, in part referring to your song here, is that when it comes in and it impacts with the groove is absolute, it feels great from the moment it comes in, it's so
good.
I was but that's what I was kind of thinking, that kind of groove as well as texture is a very important part of your music, and both playing live and in. Right, great. So because electronic music can lack groove a lot of the time, I feel can feel too mechanical or too quantized. Do you typically like to leave things as played in and try to resist the temptation to quantize to the grid?
Oh no, I'm a quantizing fool.
Quantize fool.
I cannot quantize, and I don't have to quantize. There are times where I don't, particularly when I'm playing on this thing next to me. But the thing you're asking me about rhythm in electronic productions, and if I have a gripe list, it's that too often the only thing playing rhythm is the drums, or whatever is representing within that arrangement sound-wise as the drums. I mean, drums conceptually, it may not be a kit of drums, it may be anything, but too often the only rhythmic element really is the drums, and everybody else is either going wang or it's going wah, and there's just, and melodies go floating by that may or may not have any high degree of rhythm in them, but there's just, maybe it comes from playing 30 years with a guy who plays guitar like that, but I just like to hear something in the middle, making rhythm with the drums. And I think that as long as it's not too busy and doesn't dominate the entire arrangement, it makes things funkier. And it can be a real guitar, and in my case, I'll often do that, but other people don't play guitars, and I think FM sounds are great for this purpose. I love using FM synths for this purpose, and I think that because they represent really cool in the mid-range. Given the fact that they're not analog synths and do those things, what they do well is represent both, and inharmonic stuff, which everybody knows, the bell stuff and all that other attacky, xylophone kind of thing. But the mid-range, that presentation through the mid-range, and you can distort them really well. There's distortion on some of these synths, by the way, in the piece. Like you can sort of tell I've distorted things in certain cases using probably sound toys. But so it's just Have I gotten anywhere near your question yet? In the case of the rhythmic part of the piece that is represented on this compilation, there was an idea that I wanted to start with a rhythmic element that was being played on something that comes from normal life, because I was kind of in the mood of doing that. I had done another piece like that, and that sort of interested me. So I went looking for those things and start to try to find something that was cool, and I found this. Excuse me. And then it's, what do I want to add to that? But in the case of, in other cases, I might just write a lick on a piano and go, that's a really nice beginning to something. I like the way that lays out, and it gives a nice sense of space, and it's got a little bit of rhythm in it, and it's not the drums. And so I want to develop that, and I wrote a song that we're well underway producing now, based on that. It can be a synthesizer sound, or a phrase I write based on a particular synthesizer sound that just comes out of me, and I go, "Wait, that's kind of cool," and like make a note of that. Take 5 minutes and boot up your favorite DAW. So it's not from one place, but when you ask where it comes from, that's a very, very mystical question. That goes beyond the depth of the actual technique that you use to get to that place, because where it comes from, for me, is getting things out of the way creatively so that I can get to a place where it will come. And I know it sounds horribly mystical and weird, but it's true. and It's how I do on stage. When I go out with Chic, I just shut off everything, and I'm in complete all receptors on mode, and I'm not thinking about anything, and I'm just completely reacting and trusting my body, which I'm going to have to put back into shape before we go out again, to deliver. So the melody bits come the same way. I have to get out of. I just have to trust it and let it come and not try to direct it. But other times, do I ever wake up with a melody, sometimes, not necessarily, but often the first thing I play in a given day when I sit down is sort of cool. I don't always take notes. I don't always use them. But I can just sort of sit down and play something and work it into something that's a workable melody and go on from there. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm not worried about it. I think you have to give it room to breathe to find out if it's any good, like a good bottle of wine.
Yeah.
I don't mind not finishing things until they need to be finished. I mean, I like a good creative spurt and get it to a certain degree of distance. And then I don't mind walking away and waiting until I need it. I don't mind. That's kind of how this piece happened, in a way.
So you don't
I had done it with no particular purpose.
Right. But you're not feeling kind of pressured by the dreaded unfinished sort of songs. That's okay. They can just sit there until they're needed.
It's a process. They informed the next thing I did. And if they speak on their own, that's cool too. But it's not that I'm not guilty about not finishing some things. I don't mind having them sit around. Like I said, that's what got this piece together. That's how this piece came about. This is a perfect example of something I had sitting around that I had just sort of worked on over a period of years. And now it had a home.
Nice.
If it's finished.
Well, I think that pretty much wraps up our little interview there with Rich. Thank you ever so much for joining us and to share these beautiful pearls of wisdom and to be so generous with your experience and time. Thanks ever so much, Rich, and we'll see you on a show in the near future.
Thank you, Gaz, and thank you, Nate.